And then we find the third component is to redirect your actions. In other words, take every thought captive. Get busy taking every thought captive. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse number 4, the word says, we use God's mighty weapons, not merely worldly weapons, to knock down the devil's strongholds. Say, knock them down. To knock down the devil's strongholds. Verse 5, with these weapons, we break down, say break down. We break down every proud argument that keeps people from knowing God. With these weapons, we conquer, say we conquer. With these weapons, we conquer their rebellious ideas. And we teach, say we teach. And we teach them to obey Christ. Every idea that I have, if I don't take it in under complete control, it will in turn disobey Christ. I have to take my thoughts captive and bring them into obedience to Christ. Why? Because I'm a human being, and human beings are vile by nature. I don't believe everybody's bad. That just proves my point right there. The fact that you want to go against what God says there's no good thing in us. Hello? So if you don't believe it, you're proving the point. The reality is that you don't know any human being on the face of the earth that is intrinsically good in and of himself or herself. So you have to take every thought captive. I'm talking about mamas, daddies, sisters, brothers, husbands, wives. It doesn't matter who they are. They still had to come out of the womb. And the fact that they come out of the womb, they come out on their way to hell. So you got to take those thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. God must be the commander in chief. Even your thoughts must be submitted to his control as you live for him. Can you hear me? We must practice threshold thinking. What is threshold thinking? That's nipping the rebellious thought in the bud. Getting it before it gets inside your house. It knocks on your door. There's a commercial out where this termite comes up to the door and say, I need to use a telephone. Yeah, isn't that right? I need to use a telephone. Can I come in and use a telephone? And then there's an Arkin man truck passing by. The termite sees him, then the termite goes and gets in his ride. It's got a ride that's dropped real low with some 24s on it. And he's really sparkling. He just cruises on down the road. The key is that if you don't let him in, then you won't have to worry about your stuff being torn down. Y'all don't hear this. Every thought can be stopped at the doorway of your mind. But you have to choose to do that. You have to be aggressive in stopping rebellious thoughts. You may be an aggressive, rebellious person, but you don't have to let that dominate your life. Threshold thinking. Nip rebellious thoughts in the bud. You know, today everybody seems to put his or her own interests first. Hello. Things are going to get a little bit worse, you know. But for those of us that are kept, we're going to be able to watch from the stands. Most people still reject God's right way of living. Let me go back here to Micah and his mother just one more time. In that 6th verse, you notice that the people in Micah's time replaced the true worship of God with a homemade version of worship. Hello? It was their way of operating, and justice was soon replaced by revenge and chaos. Look. Ignoring God's direction leads to confusion. It leads to destruction. It will mess up your family. It'll mess up your generations. You may think you're a good person doing a good job with your children, but if you are ignoring God's way of doing things, your children will be absolutely stone crazy. You don't believe me? Just watch them grow. You'll be visiting them in the penitentiary. You'll be going to the grave site where there's a little bitty grave next to a long grave. Hello? You'll be going to the insane asylum. You'll be going to different places because you ignored God's way of doing things. Y'all don't hear this. Anybody who has not submitted to God will end up doing whatever seems right at the time. You see, to know what is really right and to have the strength to do it, you need to draw closer to God and his word. Y'all don't hear this. If you're going to operate according to the way God says, you got to redirect your actions. Your whole process has to be changed. You got to do things the way God says do it. I know it. Well, Pastor, it doesn't feel good. That's your problem. You let your feelings drive. You can't let your feelings drive. Your faith must drive. Let me conclude this discussion by encouraging you to re-enter the peace of God. Turn to God in prayer. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 and 7, the word says, don't worry about anything. Say, I'm not worrying about anything. No, boy, wouldn't that be great if that was really true? If we actually had everybody in the church right now saying, as effective immediately, I'm not going to be worrying about my job. I'm not going to be anxious about my this. I'm not going to be anxious about that. I'm not going to be anxious about the bills. I'm just not going to be anxious anymore. Wouldn't that be great? Hello? But you're faking it. And when you fake it, you can't take it. We got to stop faking this thing. This word says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Verse 7, if you do this, you will experience God's peace, which is far more wonderful than the human mind can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and your minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Look at Colossians chapter 3, verse 15. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. For as members of one body, you're all called to live in peace and always be thankful. Saints, can I confess something to you? We all have worries. Hello. But you got to learn to turn your worries into prayers. See, to worry less, you got to pray more. Whenever you start to worry, stop and start to pray. Why would you say that, Pastor? Because God will provide. Do I have a witness? Yeah, he will. He will. He's able. He's an able God. He will provide. The battle for the mind is won through Christ. Yeah, he died on Calvary's cross. They buried him in a borrowed grave, and he laid in the grave for 3 days, and on the third day he got up from the grave with all power in his hand to show you that nothing can separate us from his love. The battle for the mind is won by resisting the devil, by keeping God as my primary and only focus. And I know that he has keeping power. Somebody look at your neighbor and say, God has keeping power. Now I asked the neighbor who said that, he say, well, how do you know that? God won't fail. Say, how do you know that? Somebody ought to be able to answer that question. You ought to be able to say, I know it because he kept me. I know he has keeping power. Because look at me. I'm a living testimony. He kept me. I done messed up so many times. I've been messed up so many times. I've been in so many mess ups that you would think I was my mess up, but I'm not. And I'm not my mess up because I serve a God who has keeping power.